Okay everyone, so here's another video. This one is a lesson, this time on painting with participles. So let's just talk quickly about what that means and how to do this. This is another quick tip that you can insert into your writing pretty easily. We're going to talk about kind of the do's and don'ts with this and kind of how this can be modified as well. So just pay attention, follow along, and again, incorporate this into your writing in some way so that you can fulfill the requirements of the memoir rubric. Alright, so it says here, a participle is a verb form that functions as an adjective, okay? So to give you kind of an example of that, kneeling, alright? Kneel by itself would be a verb, but when we add that ing on there, it becomes a participle. Now, there's more to it than just that, but what we find is that it's actually, in this case, it would be modifying, okay? It's not acting to give us an action as in, like if I said, she runs down the street or whatever. Kneeling is actually describing, and in this case it's describing what he is doing. Kneeling carefully, he washed his hand in the ocean and held it there. Now if you look right here, of course we say that kneeling is an adjective, but carefully is an adverb. Now, this is actually optional for this part, but what we find is that it can be used. So what we can kind of take from this is that the whole point of it is it gives us an extra level of description. Using the adjective along with the adverb in this sense, it just paints a full picture for us. So imagine if we didn't have that in there. He washed his hand in the ocean and held it there. Think about how basic that sounds compared to the way it's actually written. Kneeling carefully, he washed his hand in the ocean and held it there. That gives us a shift in rhythm. It also gives us an increase in description. And so it makes this sentence that would normally be kind of boring much more interesting. Why is he kneeling carefully? Is he injured? Is he just not wanting to fall in? Is he afraid of the water? Whatever it may be, but it just adds a lot more to the description than he just washed his hand in the ocean. Okay? So let's talk about these examples that I have here. The first one, it says blank, the cheetah stared at the gazelle. That's such a basic sentence without this painting with participles technique. So let's add in something. We could do something like this. How about moving? So that's our participle, moving. So that's acting as our adjective, the ing on there. Moving quietly. Okay, this is our adverb. All right. So moving quietly, the cheetah stared at the gazelle. That's a much more interesting sentence. And again, that isn't anything profound or anything like that. This is just meant to be a quick example. But the point is, even something that basic creates a sentence that is much more interesting when it's paired together. Okay? So again, just to be very clear, when I'm talking about participles, we're talking about verbs that end in ing, or they could end in ed. But the whole point is that they are acting as adjectives. So let's do a verb that ends in ed. And let's also drop the adverb part of it, because that's not really a requirement for this. It's just something that adds a little something extra special to the sentence, but it's not even required. And in some cases, it may be worse. It may be completely unnecessary to have that adverb in there. So let's just do one with only the participle, and this time let's do one with an ed. So now we're looking at this example. Blank, the scientist peered once more at the specimen. Okay? So let's go ahead and put one in. So we could say, how about horrified? Okay. Horrified. The scientist peered once more at the specimen. Okay. So that lets us know he or she, they're looking at something pretty bad. This person's looking at something frightening. But the point is, when we put this in here, this participle, okay, that we're talking about, this time with an ed on the end, we've got something much more interesting here. Now, a couple of quick things that I just want to review before I end this video. First of all, remember the punctuation. You've got to have it. Okay? That's very important. Second of all, you have to be sure that this right here is modifying, I'm talking about the participle, is modifying the word that it's closest to. Okay, the word or words that it's closest to. If you were to say instead, the cheetah stared at the gazelle moving quietly, at that point, you would actually be talking more so about the gazelle, right? Same thing. The scientist peered more at once more at the specimen, horrified. Again, it seems more like you're talking about the specimen there and not the scientist. So this is actually really important. That if you make that mistake, that's what we get into when we start talking about this misplaced or dangling modifiers, because that's all this is it's a modifier. And so if you misplace it like that, it changes what's being modified, or at least the proximity to it. And you might have intended for it to modify the cheetah or the scientist, but if you don't have it somewhat close by, that creates a problem. Now that said, you can actually put this at the end, but the key thing is, what is it modifying? All right. So what is it modifying? So you can, if you want to modify the specimen, you can do that. You can put a comma and then put a participle there at the end talking about the specimen or the gazelle, if you would rather. But the point is, it has to be modifying those things. Okay, if it's going to be on that side of the sentence, if it's going to be on the end like that, or tacked on away from this over here. Okay, so that's very important. You really need to make sure that you pay close attention to those added points as well. And one final thing I want to point out, again, stared and peered, those are both verbs. And you'll notice here we have the ed on the end of those. These are not like, for instance, what we're seeing here. All right, they're not being used the same way. These are just being used as verbs, stared and peered, in the past tense. There's a difference between that and, say, this one over here, horrified. Horrified can be used as simply a verb as well. But here the key thing is that it's being used as an adjective. Okay? Is it being used as an adjective? If it is, then it's a participle. So again, you have to think about that. And also remember, how we use this. It's very important. You have to make that decision. Am I going to say, all right, moving quietly in this sense and actually use an adverb too? Or am I just going to go along with a word like horrified? The key thing, of course, is then punctuating and making sure that you're modifying the word closest to it. So I'd like to see this technique used in your writing. Please make sure that you use these techniques. One final point, again, just like the adjectives out of order, do not use this, again and again and again and again. Okay? This is just something that you would use here or there to kind of spice up your writing, make it a little bit more interesting for the reader. All right, if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.